Note from the Baghavad Gita, chapter 2. Quote, "And now under the lotus in the heart glows the lamp of the soul. Protected by the gods who there stand guard, it sheds its soft rays in every direction." Unquote. A mighty spirit moves through the pages of the Bhagavad Gita. It has the seductive influence of beauty, yet like strength it fills one as with the sound of armies assembling or the roar of great waters. Appealing alike to the warrior and the philosopher, it shows to the one the righteousness of lawful action, and to the other the calmness which results to him who has reached inaction through action. Schlegel, after studying the poem, pays tribute to it in these words: "By the Brahmins, reverence of masters is considered the most sacred of duties. Thee, therefore, first, most holy prophet, interpreter of the deity, by whatever name thou wast called among mortals, the author of this poem, by whose oracles the mind is rapt with ineffable delight to doctrines lofty, eternal, and divine, thee first, I say, I hail, and shall always worship at thy feet." Unquote. The second chapter begins to teach philosophy, but in such a way that Arjuna is led on gradually, step by step, to the end of the dialogue. And yet the very first instructions from Krishna are so couched that the end and purpose of the scheme are seen at the beginning. Although philosophy seems dry to most people, and especially to minds in the Western world who are surrounded by the rush of their new and quite undeveloped civilization, yet it must be taught and understood. It has become the fashion to some extent even in the Theosophical Society to scout careful study or practice and go in for the rapid methods inaugurated in America. In many places, emotional goodness is declared to exceed in value the calmness that results from a broad philosophical foundation, and in others astral wonder-seeking, or great strength of mind, whether discriminative or not, is given the first rank. Strength without knowledge, and sympathetic tears without the ability to be calm, in fine, faith without works, will not save us. And this is one of the lessons of the second chapter. The greatest of the ancients inculcated by both symbols and books the absolute necessity for the acquirement of philosophical knowledge, inasmuch as strength of special faculties are useless without it. Those Greeks and others who recorded some of the wisdom of the elder Egyptians well illustrated this. They said that in the symbols it was shown as where Hermes is represented as an old and a young man, intending by this to signify that he who rightly inspects sacred matters ought to be both intelligent and strong, one of these without the other being imperfect. And for the same reason the symbol of great Sphinx was established, the beast signifying strength and the man wisdom. For strength, when destitute of the ruling aid of wisdom, is overcome by stupid astonishment, confusing all things together, and for the purpose of action the intellect is useless when it is deprived of strength. So whether our strength is that of sympathy, of astral vision, we will be confounded if philosophical knowledge be absent. But so as not to be misunderstood, I must answer the question that will be asked. Do you then condemn sympathy and love, and preach a cold philosophy only? By no means. Sympathy and emotion are as much parts of the great whole as knowledge, but inquiring students wish to know all that lies in the path. The office of sympathy, charity, and all other forms of goodness, so far as the effect on us is concerned, is to entitle us to help. By this exercise we inevitably attract to us those souls who have the knowledge and are ready to help us to acquire it also. But while we ignore philosophy and do not try to attain to right discrimination, we must pass through many lives, many weary treadmills of life, until at last, little by little, we have been forced, without our will, into the possession of the proper seeds of mental action from which the crop of right discrimination may be gathered. Arjuna asks Krishna, quote, "As I am of a disposition which is affected by compassion and the fear of doing wrong, my mind is bewildered. Tell me truly, what may be best for me to do? I am thy disciple, wherefore instruct me in my duty, who am under thy tuition. For my understanding is confounded by the dictates of my duty, and I see nothing that may assuage the grief which drieth up my faculties, although I were to obtain a kingdom without a rival upon earth or dominion over the hosts of heaven." Krishna, now the guru or spiritual teacher of Arjuna, makes a reply which is not excelled anywhere in the poem, pointing out the permanence and eternal nature of the soul, the progress it has to make through reincarnation to perfection, the error of imagining that we really do anything ourselves, and showing how all duties must be performed by him who desires to reach salvation. The words used by the blessed Lord in speaking of the soul cannot be added to by me. He says, quote, "The wise grieve not for dead or living, but never at any period did I or thou or these kings of men not exist, nor shall any of us at any time henceforward cease to exist. As the soul in the body undergoes the changes of childhood, prime, and age, so it obtains a new body hereafter. A sensible man is not troubled about that. But the contact of the elements, O son of Kunti, which bring cold and heat, pleasure and pain, which come and go and are temporary, these do thou endure, O Bharata." Note. In this verse, the 14th, Krishna calls Arjuna by two names. First, as son of Kunti, his mother, and second, as Bharata, descendant of the mighty Bharata. He is reminded of his earthly origins in the beginning, when reference is made to the elements that produce bodily sensations, and at the end, when adjured to endure these changes, his attention is directed to a great and powerful spiritual paternal ancestor. All of this is significant. End of note. For that man whom, being the same in pain and pleasure and ever constant, these elements do not afflict, is fitted for immortality. There is no existence for what it does not think, nor is there any non-existence for what exists. And further on, know this, that by which all this universe is created is indestructible. No one can cause the destruction of this inexhaustible thing. And further on, he who believes that this spirit can kill, and he who thinks that it can be killed, both of these are wrong in judgment. It is not born, nor dies at any time. It has no origin, nor will it ever have an end. Unborn, changeless, eternal both as to future and past time, it is not slain when the body is killed. How can that man, O son of Pritha, who knows that it is indestructible, constant, unborn, and inexhaustible, really cause the death of anybody or kill anybody himself? As a man abandons worn-out clothes and takes on new ones, so does the soul quit worn-out bodies and enter other, new ones. Weapons cannot cleave it. Fire cannot burn it, nor can water wet it, nor wind dry it. It is constant, capable of going everywhere, firm, immovable, and eternal. It is said to be invisible, incomprehensible, immutable. Therefore, knowing it to be such, thou art not right to grieve for it." Unquote. This is the same doctrine as is found in the Savasaya Upanishad, the identity of all spiritual beings and resignation. And by spiritual beings is meant all life above the inorganic, for man is not admitted to be material. There is only one life, one consciousness. It masquerades under all the different forms of sentient beings, and those varying forms with their intelligences mirror a portion of the one life, thus producing in each a false idea of egoism. A continuance of belief in that false ego produces a continuance of ignorance, thus delaying salvation. The beginning of the effort to dissipate this false belief is the beginning of the path. The total dissipation of it is the perfection of yoga, or union with God. The entry upon that path cannot be made until resignation is consummated, for, as the Upanishad and the Baghavad Gita say, quote, "All this, whatsoever moves on earth, is to be surrendered to the Lord, the Self. When thou hast surrendered all this, then thou mayst enjoy." Unquote. If this be true, then how necessary to consider philosophy so as to be able to cut off the false belief, and how useless to pursue occultism merely for your own benefit. You may know all about currents and polarities, about any and every phenomenon possible in the astral world, but with the death of your body it is lost, leaving to you only the amount of real spiritual advance you happen to have made. But once resign, and all is possible. This will not ruin your life, nor destroy any proper ideals. Poor and petty ideals had better be at once lost. It may seem that all ideals are gone, but that will be only the first effect of taking this step. We must be ready to say at any moment, under whatever circumstances, whether expected or unexpected, "It is just what I in fact desired." For only those ideals can be dissipated which rest upon a lower basis than the highest aim, or which are not in accord with nature's, God's, law. And as our aim ought to be to reach the supreme condition and to help all other sentient beings to do so also, we must cultivate complete resignation to the law, the expression and operation of which is seen in the circumstances of life and the ebb and flow of our inner being. All that can be gotten out of wealth, or beauty, or art, or pleasure, are merely pools of water found along our path as it wanders through the desert of life. If we are not seeking them, their appearance gives us intense pleasure, and we are thus able to use them for our good and that of others, just so long as the law leaves them to us. But when that superior power removes them, we must say, "It is just what I in fact desired." Any other cause is blindness. All the passing shows of life, whether fraught with disaster or full of fame and glory, are teachers. He who neglects them neglects opportunities which seldom the gods repeat. And the only way to learn from them is through the heart's resignation. For when we become in heart completely poor, we at once are the treasurers and disbursers of enormous riches. Krishna then insists on the scrupulous performance of natural duty. Note: some students, as well as critics, have said that theosophy teaches a running away from family and from the world, and that neither knowledge nor salvation can be gained without a ridiculous asceticism which would upset the natural order. This is wrong, and when it is believed to be a fact, now asserted by me in confidence of support from all real theosophists, that the blessed masters who ordered the founding of our society constantly read and inculcate the Baghavad Gita's philosophy, we perceive that such assertions against the society's aims are incorrect. End of note. Krishna then insists on the scrupulous performance of natural duty. Quote, And considering thine own duty as a Kshatriya, thou art not right to waver, for there is nothing better for a Kshatriya than lawful war." Unquote. In order to see more clearly the occasion for his insistence upon performance of duty, we must remember that at the opening of the battle, Arjuna threw down his bow and arrows. This, in India, meant that he then resolved to desert the circumstances in which karma had placed him and to become an ascetic, or, as has been frequently proposed by Western students, he wished to get away from a state of society which offered apparent obstruction to spiritual culture. But Krishna refers him to his birth in the Kshatriya, or warrior caste, and to the natural duty of a Kshatriya, which is war. The natural caste of Arjuna might have been represented as that of merchant, but wisely it was not, for this is the book of action, and only a warrior fitly typifies action. So his natural duty will stand for whatever be that of any man. Note: my opinion is that the Kshatriya caste is the greatest. The Brahmans, it is true, have always had more veneration paid them as being spiritual teachers and thus representing the head of Brahma. But in some of the Aryan sacrifices there is an occasion when the Kshatriya ranks the Brahman. The latter are more the conservators of true doctrine, but when the time comes for the gods to descend in order to establish a new harmony on earth, they always begin with a warrior. Osiris, who educated and solidified the Egyptians, was a warrior, and the mysterious Melchizedek, who blessed Abraham, was prophet, priest, and king, that is, warrior. Then, too, the warrior caste could learn and speak the Vedas as well as engage in war, whereas the Brahman's only duty was that of a teacher and not fighter. The Kshatriya, therefore, stands in the position of mediator between the action of the body of Brahma and the calm inaction of Brahma's head. End of note. We are not to shirk our karma. By abhorring it, we only make new karma. Our only true course is to let the motive for action be in the action itself, never in its reward, not to be incited to action by the hope of the result, nor yet indulge in a propensity to inertness. This advice and the direction to see the one spirit in all things and all things in it express the gist of the Baghavad Gita's teaching as to the proper attitude to be assumed by those striving after salvation. In verse 40, Krishna alludes to this system as being one of initiation. Quote, "In this no initiation is lost, nor are there any evil consequences, and even a little of this practice saves from great danger. There is no destruction of, nor detriment to one's efforts." Unquote. Although not proclaimed in the newspapers, nor advertised here and there through secretaries, delegates, and, quote, doors, unquote, this is the mother and the head of all systems of initiation. It is the progenitor of the mystic Rosicrucians, who have adopted the lotus and changed it into a rose, and all the other hundreds of initiating occult societies are merely faint and incomplete copies of this real one, but unlike those, it has never dissolved. Note: the probability is that the Rosicrucian rose was altered from the lotus because the latter flower was not understood in Europe, whereas the rose was, and the rose is the nearest to the lotus, taken all in all. In Japan, the lotus in the heart is adhered to. They say that by directing attention to the heart, it is found to burst open into a lotus of 8 petals, in each of which resides one power, while in the center sits the Lord of all. End of note. It is secret because founded in nature and having only real hierophants at the head, its privacy cannot be invaded without the real key. And that key in each degree is the aspirant himself. Until that aspirant has become in fact the sign and the key, he cannot enter the degree above him. As a whole then, and in each degree, it is self-protective. Thus including all other systems, it is the most difficult of all. But as at some time, in this life or in succeeding age, we must perforce enter this lodge, the attempt at entry might as well be made at once. Of this we will speak in our next. In my last, I said that a system of initiation is spoken of which is the mother of all others, and that all the rest are mere exoteric copies or perversions of the real. In order that the idea intended to be expressed may be made clear, it is so to be stated that the system is not confined to India, but at the same time it is true that the Western world has up to this time been so deeply engaged in the pursuit of mere money and external enjoyment that no body of hierophants has taken up its actual residence in Europe or America as yet. There is a very little force in the objection that if those adepts have such powers as have been ascribed to them, they could very easily have a residence here and overcome all the influences of the place. If it were in the least necessary that they should be here, no doubt can there be that they would come. But as all of the work required to be done, all that could possibly be accomplished is to be achieved by the messengers sent out into each country who, so to say, prepare their ground, with the assistance of the adepts. For others who follow them, there would be a waste of energy if the hierophants appeared in person. Nor are those messengers dismayed by the critical attitude of those persons who, wanting a sign, continually deny that the help for the workers is afforded because the givers of it cannot be seen. And it can also be admitted that even the workers themselves are not continually in receipt of instruction or telegrams showing how and where to work. They are men and women who possess a faith that carries them through a long course of effort without a glimpse of those who have sent them. Yet at the same time, some of them now and then see very plain evidence of the fact that they are constantly assisted. Quote, that we all labor together transmitting the same charge and succession, we few equals, indifferent of lands, indifferent of times, we, enclosers of all continents, all castes, allowers of all theologies, compassionators, perceivers, report of men, we walk silent among disputes and assertions, but reject not the disputers, nor anything that is asserted. We hear the bawling and din, we are reached by divisions, jealousies, recriminations on every side. They close peremptorily upon us to surround us, my comrade. Yet we walk upheld, free, the whole earth over, journeying up and down till we make our ineffaceable mark upon time and the diverse eras, till we saturate time and eras, that the men and women of races, ages to come, may prove brethren and lovers as we are. Unquote. So all this preparation is similar to that of the primeval forest by the early settlers in America. It is as yet hardly a tilling of the soil, but rather a clearing off of trees and weeds. This is not because they are unable to do more, but because the weeds and trees are there requiring to be removed before the elder ones can usefully push on in person the further development. Quote, when the materials are all prepared and ready, the architects shall appear. Unquote. All human beings are working through this system of initiation, and for that reason it includes all the exoteric societies. Very often the masters in this have appeared in those when they saw an opportunity for sowing the seed, which, although for a time to be enclosed in the shell of formalism, was to be preserved for future use. just as the Egyptian mummy held in its hand for centuries the germ that blossomed and bore fruit in our day. And since man in all his struggles must be helped, they have assisted in political changes where a hope was held out for the rise of a beneficent era. Note: it has been asserted by some theosophical writer that these adepts were concerned in the formation of the American Republic, and either were here in person or sent messengers. End of note. The great mass of men are not, with their own knowledge, engaged in the work of this powerful and impregnable lodge, but they will knowingly engage therein some point in the course of their long evolution. And yet at every hour of each day these masters are willing and anxious to meet those who are clear-eyed enough to see their true destiny, and noble-hearted so as to work for the great orphan, humanity. Then, further, none of us, and especially those who have heard of the path or of occultism or of the masters, can say with confidence that he is not already one who has passed through some initiations with knowledge of them. We may be already initiated into some higher degree than our present attainment would suggest, and are undergoing a new trial unknown to ourselves. It is better to consider that we are being sure to eliminate all pride of that unknown advance we have made. Having so concluded, we know that this long life is in itself another initiation, wherein we succeed or fail just as we learn the lesson of life. Some, I know, will not hasten to adopt this view, for they desire the law to work in the manner appointed by them. They wish to have a sign or a password or a parchment or some wonderful test propounded, to which they shall be ready to submit at a certain time and place. But this is not the manner of it, and all true students know that. Surely, if the literal circumstances of life are not understood, if they have yet power to light the torch of anger or blow up the smouldering fire of lust, no set time or tournament will be offered for you by the masters of this lodge. Those set times and larger tests are given and have in their place to be overcome, but they belong to the day when you have raised the arch of attainment all perfect but the keystone that is found or lost in the appointed trial. Reaching the actual door of this lodge is the path that I spoke of in my last, and leading to that path are many roads. We might as well attempt to enter the path in this incarnation as to wait for succeeding lives. There is great encouragement in Krishna's words to Arjuna in the 2nd chapter. Quote, "In this system there is no destruction of or detriment of one's efforts. Even a very small portion of this duty delivereth a man from great fear." Unquote. This refers to the law of karma. Every point of progress gained is never in reality lost. Even did we die at a time when our lives were not stainless, the real level of our development would not be lowered, for upon reassuming a mortal body in some afterlife on this earth, we take up the thread just where we dropped it. In a later chapter, Krishna says that we come in contact with the knowledge which belonged to us in our former body, and from that time we struggle more diligently toward perfection. Patanjali also says the same thing, and all the Aryan sacred books concur in the opinion. Note: see Patanjali's Yoga Aphorisms, Book 2, and Vishnu Smriti, Chapter 97, verse 11. The thoughts and aspirations of our life form a mass of force that operates instantly upon our acquirement of a body that furnishes the corresponding instrument, or upon our so altering our mental state as to give it opportunity for action. The objection that this would be a suspension of energy is not tenable, since such a thing is well known in the physical world, even if called by some other name. We are not obliged to rest on that objection, as it by no means follows that the energy is suspended. It has its operation in other ways. The encouragement given by Krishna leads us to consider what method is offered for entering upon the path. We find it to be right knowledge of the Spirit. This right knowledge is found in the 2nd chapter. As by all illuminated sages, the ultimate truth is first declared by the blessed Lord, as we have seen, and in the very chapter wherein right action is insisted upon as the way to liberation. He then, proceeding to explain himself further, points out errors common to humanity, and certain false views that prevailed in India then as they do now. In verse 41, in this system there is only one single object of a steady, constant nature, O son of Kuru. Those who do not persevere, and whose principles are indefinite, have objects with many ramifications and without end. In the men thus described, desires for worldly or intellectual acquisitions prevail, and desires being infinite, as also capable of producing endless modifications of desire, there is no concentration possible. This also has an application to the methods of our present scientific schools, which indulge in an eternal seeking for so-called facts before general principles are admitted. One single branch of investigation with them has endless ramifications that no human being could compass in a lifetime. Then, not disposed to meditation and perseverance is the intention of those who are devoted to enjoyments and dominion, and whose minds are seduced by that flowery sentence which is proclaimed by the unwise, who delight in texts from the Vedas, O son of Prita, and say, "There is nothing else than that," being covetous-minded and considering heaven as the very highest good, offering rebirth as the reward of actions, and enjoining many special ceremonies for the sake of obtaining pleasures and dominion, and preferring the transient enjoyment of heaven to eternal absorption. This is better understood when some of the ideas held in India regarding sacrifices and ceremonies are known. In the Occident, sacrifices have long gone out of use, as there appeared to be no reason for them. And yet it must seem strange to the reflective mind that Christian nations should claim redemption through the Jews, whose prophet enjoined sacrifices, and when Jesus himself said that not one jot or tittle of the law should pass away. In the place of the sacrifices of the East, the West has adopted a mere theory to be embraced, together with an uncertain moral code to be followed, with a result which is the same as that claimed by the Hindus, save only in one respect. That difference lies in the doctrine of reincarnation. The Christian looks for an eternal reward in heaven and knows nothing of reincarnation on earth, while the Hindu relies upon pleasure to be had in heaven, called Svarga, and a continuation of it upon earth by reason of fortunate rebirth. They have special ceremonies, certain sorts of sacrifices, penances, prayers, and actions, the result of which is a rebirth on earth, in a royal family, or with great riches, or in any other sort of pleasant circumstances, and also a sure admittance to heaven. Some ceremonies produce entrance into a delightful state after death, which will last for incalculable periods of time. Now, no one of these sorts of procedure leads us to the ultimate, but all are causes of karma and of delusion. Therefore Krishna did not approve them to Arjuna, and his warning is useful to theosophists who are students or wish to become such. With them, the false view warned against by Krishna has altered itself into a craving for phenomena, or to perform some action that shall bring them the favor of Mahatmas, or a morbid fear of making karma, or else an equally accentuated desire to acquire good karma. They should abandon those attitudes and carefully study the following verses, trying to incorporate their true meaning into their very being. The subject of the three Vedas is the assemblage of the three qualities. O Arjuna, be thou free from these three qualities, from the ordinary influence of the natural opposites, reposing on eternal truth, free from worldly anxieties, self-possessed. And further, let then the motive for action be in the action itself, never in its event. Be not one whose motive for action is the hope of reward. Let not thy life be spent in inaction. Depend upon concentration, perform thy duty, abandon all thought of the consequence, and make the event equal to thee, whether it terminate in good or evil, for such an equanimity is called yoga, union with God. By far inferior to union with wisdom is action. Seek an asylum, then, in wisdom alone, for the miserable and unhappy are so on account of event of things. Men who are endued with true wisdom dismiss, by means of this concentration, alike successful and unsuccessful results. Study then to obtain this concentration of thy understanding, for such concentration is a precious art. Wise men who have abandoned all thought of the fruit which is produced from their actions are freed from the chains of birth in this world, and go to the regions of eternal happiness. When thy reason shall get the better of the gloomy weakness of thy heart, then shalt thou have obtained all knowledge which has been or is to be taught. When thy understanding by study brought to maturity shall be fixed immovably in contemplation, then shall it obtain true wisdom. The first portion of this paper was designedly enlarged in order to precede the above. The last quoted verses contain the essence of what is called karma yoga, or as it might be translated, concentration and contemplation while engaged in action. It is difficult, just as it is difficult to enter upon the path, and if we desire to tread that aright, we must know what we should do as true travelers. Krishna seems to me to here settle the dispute as to whether faith or works will save us. Mere faith will not do it, because in every act of faith there is some action, and it would appear to be impossible to acquire true faith without at once turning it into that sort of action which our faith shows us must be done, as it were, in evidence. Yet action, pure and simple, will not be the cause of liberation, inasmuch as action or karma will produce new karma. We must therefore seek for concentration in order that we may be able to do those actions which the All-Wise presents to us to be done, remaining the while unaffected. We have nothing to do with the results. They will come of themselves and are beyond us. They are already done as far as we are concerned. But if we perform either an act of faith or an action of the body, hoping for any result no matter what, we become to that extent attached to the consequences, and thus bound by them. It matters not whether those consequences be good or bad. Many will think that it is well to have attachment to good consequences, since that has been the received opinion. But this is unwise, because the only reason for it is found in the idea that thereby one is somewhat better than some other persons who are enamored of evil results and desire to see them come to pass. This idea produces separateness, and is opposed to that identity without the realization of which there can be no true knowledge. We should therefore be imitators of the deity, who, while acting as he does in the manifestation of universes, is at the same time free from all consequences. To the extent that we do so, we become the deity himself, for as we follow the dictates of the Lord who dwells in us, we resign every act upon the altar, leaving the consequences to him. The attitude to be assumed, then, is that of doing every act, small and great, trifling or important, because it is before us to do, and as a mere carrying out by us as instruments of the will of that deity who is our self. Nor should we stop to inquire whether the act is of any use to the Lord within, as some ask. Note on Lord within, Ishvar, the particular manifestation of Brahma in each human being. End of note. For, they say, of what possible benefit to him can be the small hourly acts which, as soon as done, are forgotten? It is not for us to inquire. The act that pleases that Lord is the act which is done as presented, with no attachment to its result, while the act that is unpleasing to him is the one which we do, desiring some results therefrom. This practice is the highest, that which someday we must and will learn to perform. Other sorts are inculcated in other writings, but they are only steps to lead us at last to this. Therefore I said, let us enter the path as soon as we can. We are still on the second chapter. If my object were merely to skim through the poem, showing where it agreed with, differed from, or reconciled the various systems of philosophy that were followed in India, we could have long ago reached the end of the book. But we are looking at it in one of its aspects, the one most important for all earnest students, the personal interior view that aids us to reach moksha. From this standpoint, we can easily defer a consideration of the philosophical discussion to a later period. Note: moksha means salvation. End of note. Let us take up some of the instruction given in the portion of the second chapter just finished. The remainder of the lecture is devoted to a reply from Krishna to Arjuna's question as to what is the description, appearance, carriage, and conversation of the man who has attained to steady meditation. Krishna says that the subject of the three Vedas is the assemblage of the three qualities. These three qualities are sattva, rajas, and tamas, and are separately treated in a succeeding chapter. Now, sattva guna, or quality of truth, or purity, is a pure, high quality, the opposite of a tamaguna, which is darkness and indifference. Yet the remarkable advice is here given, be thou free from these three qualities. It is a very great wonder that this has not been pounced upon before, showing that Krishna directs his follower to renounce the quality of goodness, and thus directly encourages wickedness, but as that is immediately followed by the direction to repose upon eternal truth, possible critics have been perhaps deterred by the seeming paradox. It is evident at once that a higher sort of sattva is referred to in the words eternal truth. Sattva is the Sanskrit for truth, and is not qualified when its place among the three qualities is given, so that when the disciple frees himself from this ordinary sattva, he is to take refuge in its eternal counterpart. Further, the instruction is not to renounce truth or either of the other two qualities, but to remain freed from the influence or binding force that any sort of quality has upon the human ego. It is difficult for a great being such as Krishna to convey to the inquiring mind these high themes, and so perforce language must be used that forever has two meanings. It continually retreats before us, going from one to the other. Sattva, truth, had to be taken to express the highest quality of any being who possesses them, and yet, when we begin to speak of the highest conceivable state in which attributes are absent, we still use the same word, only adding to it eternal. The essence of the instruction given by Krishna is to become devoted, as he says. Therefore, give thyself up to devotion. He prepared the way for that by showing, as adverted in the last article, how erroneous it was to follow even the special sermons and texts laid down for the people in the Vedas. Those sermons procured either rewards in heaven or upon the earth during subsequent lives, as well as in those in which the sermons were performed. We can more easily understand what Krishna meant if we will suppose him to be referring to a doctrine that in those days was precisely similar in its scheme of reward to the old-fashioned Christian belief that, by following the scriptures, one secured happiness and prosperity on earth and great bliss forever in heaven with the saints. This is declared by him to be a deluding doctrine. He does not say that the rewards as laid down will not follow the practice, but implies that they will. But as the wheel of rebirth will eternally revolve, drawing us inevitably back to a mortal body, we are continually deluded and never succeed in attaining to God, that being the goal for us all. Heaven, whether it be that of the Christian or of the Hindu, is what Buddha called a thing or state that has a beginning and will have an end. It may surely last aeons of time, but it will come to an end, and then the weary task of treading the world, whether this or some other one, has to be recommenced. Hence Krishna said that men were deluded by those flowery sentences proclaiming a means of reaching heaven, than which there was nothing better. Doubtless there are many students who, believing in the possibility of reaching heaven, say that they are willing to take the risk of what may happen after the enjoyment for such a long period is ended. But those risks would not be taken were they well understood. They are numerous and great. Many of them are found in what we may roughly for the present call delayed karma and unspent affinities. The power of these two has its root in the vast complexity of man's nature. Such is its complexity that a man cannot, as a complete being, ever enjoy heaven or any state short of union with the divine. Learned theosophists talk of a man's going to Devakan, and of his being here on earth suffering or enjoying karma, when as a fact only a small part of him is either here or there. When he has lived out his life and gone to Devakan, the vast root of his being stands waiting in the one life, waiting patiently for him to return and exhaust some more karma. That is, in any one life, the ordinary man only takes up and exhausts what karma his bodily apparatus permits. Part of the power of karma is in the mysterious power of meditation, which exhibits itself according to the particular corporeal body one has assumed. So the man may in this life perform special ceremonies, and conform to texts and doctrine, attaining thereby the reward of heaven, and still have left over a quantity of that mysterious power of meditation unexpended. And what its complexion is, he does not know. Its risk, therefore, is that it may be very bad, and when he does return from heaven, his next body may furnish the needed apparatus to bring up to the front this mass of unexpended karma, and his next compensation might be a sojourn in hell. In reassuming a body, the mysterious power spoken of reaches out to numberless affinities engendered in other lives, and takes hold of all that come in its reach. Other beings, once known to the man, arrive into incarnation at the same time, and bring into action affinities, attractions, and powers that can only act through them and him. Their influence cannot be calculated. It may be good or bad, and just as he is swayed by them, or as his sway the other being, so will work out the karma of each. Krishna therefore advises Arjuna to be free from the influence of the quality, so that he may obtain a complete release, and that freedom can only be attained, as he says, by means of devotion. These effects, divergencies, and swaying are well known to occultists, and although the idea is very new in the West, it is not unknown in India. This law is both an angel of mercy and a messenger of justice, for while we have just stated its operation as among the risks, it is also a means whereby nature saves men often from damnation. Suppose in some lifelong past I had a dear friend, or wife, or relative, with whom my intimacy was interior and deep. Death separated us, and in subsequent lives he devotes himself to truth, to wisdom, to the highest in him, while I go on careless of all but pleasure in the present. After many lives we meet again as either friends or acquaintances. At once the old intimacy asserts itself, and my former friend, although maybe neither of us knows it, has a strange power to touch my inward life, and wakes me up to search for truth and my own soul. It is the unexpended affinity, and by its aid nature works my salvation. Then we should both seek devotion. This devotion is what is inculcated by the adepts to their chelas. It involves a mental abnegation not agreeable to our modern mind, but that must be acquired or real progress is impossible. We must, by means of this mental devotion to the divine, which means abnegation of all the rest, dismiss all results of our actions. It is not ours to say what shall be the result of an action. The law will bring about a result much better perhaps than we had imagined. If the passing daily circumstances are not those we expected, then by means of devotion we accept them as just what the law intended. But if we fix our desire on accomplishing even a seeming good result, we are bound by that desire, no matter whether our wish is accomplished or not. This exhortation to devotion is at once the most simple and the most difficult. Some deride it because they want powers and, quote, development, unquote. Others because they think it is too simple. But the wise student, even when he cannot at first grasp its meaning, will revolve it in his mind, strive after it, and make it a thing to be attained by him. We have seen that devotion must be attained by that student who desires to reach enlightenment. This is what is meant by Krishna's reply to Arjuna at the conclusion of the 2nd chapter. Quote, "When he has put away all desires which enter the heart, and is satisfied by the self in himself, he is then said to be confirmed in spiritual knowledge." Unquote. It is not possible to be wholly given up to the dictates of the spirit, while any desires that come into the heart are permitted to engross the attention. Of course, the person described here is one who has gone much higher in development than most of us have been able to. But we ought to set up a high ideal at which to aim, for a low one gives a lower result at the expense of the same effort. We should not put before us an aim less than the highest merely because it seems that our success will not be as great as we think it ought to be. It is not so much the clearly perceived outward result that counts, as the motive, effort, and aim, for judgment is not passed upon us among the things of sense where human time exists, but in that larger sphere of being where time ceases, and where we are confronted by what we are, and not by what we have done. That which we have done touches us only in mortal life among the delusions of material existence. But the motives with which we live our lives go to make up our greater being, our larger life, our truer self. Do actions we must, for no mortal can live without performing actions. Those bring us back to earth for many weary incarnations, perhaps to final failure, unless the lesson is learned that they must be done with the right motive and the true aim. That stage reached, they affect us no more, for like Krishna we become the perfect performers of all action. And in so far as we purify and elevate the motive and the aim, we become spiritually enlightened, reaching in time the power to see what should be done and what refrained from. Many would-be occultists, as well as some theosophists, leave out of sight this chapter's teaching. Devotion has no charms for them. They leave it to those who would be good men, no matter what their creed or philosophy, and attention is paid to reading books, either new or old, upon magic, upon ceremonial, or any other of the manifold delusions. Nor is this erroneous practice newly risen. It was common among the alchemists, and the result in some cases is that students now waste valuable years in mastering ceremonial, Rosicrucianism, talismanic lore, and whatnot, as laid down in the books, while all of it is either useless mental lumber or positively dangerous. I do not mean it to be understood that there never was real Rosicrucianism, or that ceremonial magic yields no results, or that there is no science of talismans. There are realities of which these, as now known, are shadows. But we might as well expect to find the soul by attentively studying the body as to know the truths behind the influence of talismans or ceremonial magic by studying the books now extant upon those subjects. The medieval so-called magicians have left a mass of writings that are now a delusion and a snare for students, theosophical and non-theosophical. In these are minute directions for various sorts of practices, but they are all the attempts of men to enable mortals, by methods altogether outward, to control the astral or natural world. Success did not come to these practitioners, nor will much else save failure be the portion of those of our own day who follow their directions. In most cases of the old European so-called sorcerers and writers on magic, their published lucubrations are only salves to disappointed vanity. In the rest, mere reduplications of formulae left by their predecessors. Paracelsus positively declares that true magic is within the man, a part of his inner nature, potential at first, active after development, and that ceremonies or formulae are the veriest rubbish unless the person using them is himself a magician. In the practice of ceremonial magic, where certain geometrical and other figures are to be used with the aid of prayers and invocations, there lies positive danger. This danger is increased if the student follows the practice for the sake of gain or glory or power, or mere wonder-seeking, all of these being selfish. In this ceremonial, the operator, or self-styled magus, surrounds himself with a circle or an arrangement of triangles, the use and purpose of which are to protect him from whatever spirits he may arouse. Mark that well. It is for protection. Protection of this sort would not be needed or thought of unless a fear lurked inside that the shades or demons had power to hurt. So at the outset, fear, the product of ignorance, is fully present. The next important thing to be noted is that a sword has to enter into the conjuration. This is advised because the demons are said to fear sharp steel. Now Jesus said that he who lived by the sword should perish by the sword. By this he meant just what we are talking about. Ceremonial magic involves at almost every step the use of a sword. After the invocator or magus has used the ceremonial, say with success, for some time, he at last creates within his aura, or what Swedenborg called his sphere, a duplicate of what he had previously used and pictured on the floor or walls. In this he is no longer master, for, it being placed in that part of his nature of which he is ignorant, the sword of metal becomes an astral sword with the handle held by the demons or influences he unwisely raised. They then attack him where no defense can be interposed, on the astral and mental planes, and just as surely as the wise man's words were uttered, he at last perishes by the weapon he himself used. This danger, thus roughly outlined, is no mere figment of the brain. It is positive, actual, immanent in the practice. No book study will give a man the power to make the constitutional changes, as well as psychical alterations needed before his command of immaterial forces. But these latter may be temporarily evoked and made acquainted with us by pursuing certain methods. That is the beginning. Their turn is sure to come, and obeying a law of their nature, They take what has sometimes been called their, quote, revenge, unquote. For all such practices call only upon the lower, unspiritual part of our nature, and that clothes such beings with corresponding attributes. Their, quote, revenge, unquote, consists in bringing on inflammations in the moral character which will eventuate in a development of evil passions, atrophy of concentration, destruction of memory, ending at last in a miserable conclusion to life, and almost total failure to use the opportunities for progress presented by that incarnation. Therefore I said it is all either useless mental lumber or positively dangerous. In history and in our own experience there is abundant evidence that the Bhagavad Gita is right in saying spiritual knowledge includes every action without exception, and that it is to be attained by means of devotion. Ignorant men who had no access to books have by their inward sense perceived the real truth of things, not only those round about them, but relating to the larger concerns of nature. Jacob Boehme was wholly unlettered, but he knew the truth. His writings show an acquaintance not to be then gained from books, with the true doctrines found in the Hindu scriptures and secret books. In Germany today are men known to me who, more unlearned yet than Jacob Boehme was, know many things still mysteries for our learned theosophists who can boast of a college education. The reason is that these men have attained to devotion and thereby cleared away from before the eye of the soul the clouds of sense whose shadows obscure our view of truth. I do not decry or despise learning. It is a great possession. But if the learned man were also a devoted one in the sense of the Bhagavad Gita, how much wider would be the sweep of his intellection no one could calculate. Learning of the human sort is not despised among the highest occultists, even among the adepts. They use it and acquire it. They accumulate the record of the experiences of seers and devoted men of small learning for long periods of time, until a great master of both learning and devotion arises who, by reason of his profound knowledge joined to devotion, can make the wonderful deductions in the possessions of the lodge, so far beyond us that they can with difficulty be imagined. But this again proves that devotion is the first and best, for these extraordinary masters would not appear unless devotion had been the aim of their existence. Without devotion, a vast confusion arises within us that has been likened by some to a whirling motion, by others to the inrushing, overpowering flow of turbid waters. Boehme calls it in some aspects the turba. It is the delusion produced by the senses. And so Krishna, in closing the second lecture, says, "Let a man, restraining all these, remain in devotion when at rest, and intent on me alone. For he whose senses are under his control possesses spiritual knowledge. Attachment to objects of sense arises in a man who meditates upon them. From attachment arises desire. From desire passion springs up. From passion comes bewilderment. From bewilderment confusion of the memory. From confusion of the memory destruction of the intellect. From destruction of the intellect he perishes. But he who approaches the objects of sense with senses free from love and hate, and beneath his own control, having his soul well disposed, attains to tranquillity of thought. In this tranquillity there springs up in him a separation from all troubles, for the mind of him whose thoughts are tranquil soon becomes perfect in concentration." A very beautiful portion of Sanatsuyaitya may be read with profit here, from chapter 2. Quote, "Some say that freedom from death results from action, and others that death exists not. Hear me explain this, O king, have no misgivings about it. Both truths, O Kshatriya, have been current from the beginning. The wise maintain what is called delusion to be death. I verily call heedlessness death, and likewise are called freedom from heedlessness immortality. Through heedlessness, verily, were the demons vanquished, and through freedom from it the gods attained to the Brahman. Death, verily, does not devour living creatures like a tiger, for indeed his form is not to be perceived. Heedlessness develops in men as desire, and afterwards as wrath, and in the shape of delusion. And then traveling in devious paths through egoism, one does not attain to union with the self. Those who are deluded by it, and who remain under its influence, depart from this world, and then again fall down into generation. Then the senses gather round them, and then they undergo death after death. Being attached to the fruit of action, on action presenting itself, they follow after it and do not cross beyond death. And the embodied self, in consequence of not understanding union with the real entity, proceeds on all hands with attachments to enjoyments. That, verily, is the great source of delusion to the senses, for by contact with unreal entities, his migrations are rendered inevitable, because having his inner self contaminated by contact with unreal entities, he devotes himself to objects of sense on all sides, pondering on them only. That pondering first confuses him, and soon afterwards desire and wrath attack him. These lead children to death, but sensible men cross beyond death by their good sense. He who, pondering on the self, destroys the fugitive objects of sense, not even thinking of them through contempt for them, and who, being possessed of knowledge, destroys desires in this way, becomes, as it were, the death of death itself, and swallows it up." Unquote. The second chapter ends with a declaration of what is the sort of death that results in the union with the divine, preventing absolutely any return to incarnations upon earth. It is found in the sentences, quote, "That man who, casting off all desires, acts without attachment to results, free from egotism and selfishness, attains to tranquility. This is the condition of the Supreme Being, O son of Prita. Having obtained this, one is not troubled, and remaining in it even at the time of death, he passes on to extinction or union with the Supreme Spirit." Unquote. Those are the last words of the second chapter. Any other mental attitude at the time of passing away will surely cause us to acquire a mortal body again. Krishna's declaration brings up before us not only the practices previously inculcated, but also the whole subject of death. For in order to know how to think of him at the moment of death, or to have that tranquility which only perfection of devotion confers, we must find out what death is, and whether it is solely what we see going on at the decease of a human being, or more than can be gauged with the eye. A little reflection shows that what is seen and noted by physicians and spectators is but the withdrawal of the soul and energy from the outer envelope called body. While that is going on, the person may accept rites of the church or profess adherence to any sort of doctrine whatever, even with this last outward sigh speak of heaven with its bliss awaiting him. But that is only the first step. It leaves his visible features calm and happy, perhaps, in expression. His relatives close his eyes. They call it death. He, however, has only begun to die. The soul has yet to pass through other envelopes beyond the ken of friends, beyond even the dying man's present control. And now depends upon the whole course and kind of thought in which he indulged during the life of the body. For the soul has to pass along the road by which it came, and that way is lined with the memories of a lifetime. As these memories rise up, they affect the departing entity, causing it to be either disturbed from concentration on the Supreme Being, or assisting to a greater perfection. If then some few years only near the close of life were devoted to the sort of practice inculcated by Krishna, the memories of the years previously spent in following after desires will throw a cloud over the soul and absolutely prevent it from attaining that state from which return to earth is impossible without our consent. It is more perfectly illustrated by considering life as a grand musical movement that is brought to a close by using at once all the tones sounded throughout the whole preceding portion. The result will be a combined sound, expressing neither the highest nor lowest notes, or the sweetest or less sweet, but the resultant of all. And this last sound is the fixed vibration that governs the entity, sounding all through him and throwing him into the state to which it corresponds or of which it is the key. Thus it is easily seen that in each thought lie the possibilities of a harmony or a discord for life's conclusion. Quote, "Guided by the clear light of the soul, we have considered thy teachings, O holy sage. They have been efficacious for the removal of the obscurities surrounding Ishvara's abiding place in us. We are delighted and refreshed. May thy words remain with us, and as a spring refreshes the earth, may we be refreshed by them." Unquote.